I always felt like when I was discharging a lot of my patients that I was like, "Ah, I feel like there's something missing. I could do more." And that's what I explained to my husband is like the newbie to me, it was the missing link. It was the missing link that I've been looking for years to get my patients from that 85% that everybody was happy and satisfied with to like that 100%.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system. In this podcast, we'll share knowledge from the frontiers of neuroscience and inspirational stories of how applying that knowledge has empowered people from all walks of life to heal, adapt, and grow. Welcome back, NeuFit Nation, to the Undercurrent podcast. And today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Cristy Steinberg. Cristy is a physical therapist who's worked in multiple settings, most recently at her fairly new clinic that she's opened up in Highland Park, Illinois, called the Kinesio Lab. And I'm really excited to dive in and help give Cristy an opportunity to share with you her experience, her perspective, how she treats patients, how she's incorporating the newbie. This should be a fun conversation. So, Cristy, welcome.
Hi, Garrett. How are you?
I'm great. I'm really excited for this.
Me too. Me too. This is very exciting.
Yes. So we had a chance to visit when you were here in Austin for spring break, which was a lot of fun, and just to give a sense of the inspiring person that you are, you've rubbed off on your son. We'll get into your story from going off and starting your own business and stuff, but you've given some of that entrepreneurial spirit to your son, and he, as a 14-year-old, is interviewing professional athletes and sports writers, and he interviewed me while you were here in town. That was a really fun experience.
Yeah, a lot of college athletes and how it's Garrett just did a podcast last week and it touched on the idea of like how sports has impacted career. And obviously, Garrett, you are a perfect example of how playing college athletics has really made you a huge success. So, yeah.
That's right. It was such a good conversation topic that we all had there. It inspired me to do a whole podcast episode about it just a few episodes ago. And so you're a tremendous mother, I could tell by your parents, and also a very, very, I would say, brilliant and accomplished physical therapist. And let's, of course, dive in to that here. So you've had an interesting career path, going from the bigger corporate setting, doing some, mobile work, now starting your own practice. Can you talk about your history in the profession and share with us the steps in that evolution?
Yeah. So actually, I started practicing almost 20 years ago, and I started in inpatient rehab, skilled nursing rehab, doing short-term rehab for joint replacements. And then I ended up moving into the city, and I was doing therapy at inpatient hospital for joint programs. So I did a lot of joint replacements in the first 10 years of my career. And so I ended up, the last place I was working at before I went out on my own was at Illinois Bone and Joint, which is a really large outpatient orthopedic group and physical therapy group in the Chicagoland area. And I did that for a little, and they kind of tailed off into doing some home health. And so I was doing sort of a continuation of care. So I was seeing people pre-op, and then I was seeing them post-op at their house for a few weeks, and then I was carrying them over into the outpatient clinic. And what started happening is my patients that I was seeing at their house, they were like, I don't want to go to the clinic. Will you just come to my house? And I was like, nah, you can't do that. And they're like, I said, I don't have nurses that work for me. You got to go to outpatient. You can't do it. And so one day I came home and, I'm seeing, an insane caseload every day. And I had a bunch of progress notes, and I was like, oh, I don't think I helped anyone. And I did all these progress notes. They've been seeing me for a month and like, what's been going on? And so my husband decided, he said, why don't you do mobile therapy? And I said, because that's not a thing. You can't do that. And he was like, well, why not? And he's in accounting. He doesn't know anything about healthcare. And he's like, just call the insurance companies and ask them. And so I called the insurance companies three different times because I wanted to make sure I got the same exact answer. Because anyone who's listening that deals with insurance companies, you can get different answers at different times. And they go, yeah, you can do outpatient therapy at people's homes. It's called, it's a mobile practice. So I was one of the first, it's getting more popular here in Chicago, but I was one of the first people to be doing mobile therapy in Chicago. So, there was kind of an educational factor that went into that. I've had doctors tell me I was illegally like seeing patients and that, you can't do outpatient. And I was like, I get paid by Medicare and the insurance companies and it's legal, so there was definitely educational. And so the last 8 years, that's what I have been doing is mobile PT around the Chicagoland area and the northern suburbs and going to people's homes, a lot of post-op stuff, orthopedic stuff, because they couldn't drive to clinics and then COVID happened and everybody wanted somebody at home. And so then it sort of evolved into, our lifestyle after COVID. A lot of people work from home. A lot of people got used to things coming. So it really had boomed in the last few years just because people wanted more things at home and didn't want to be. And then what happened is, I got one-on-one time with everybody. So, people enjoyed not going into a clinic where they were seen for 20 minutes maybe and then passed off to someone and their therapist really not paying attention to them. But then about 7 months ago, in October of last year, I was at a conference where I met Garrett, you and the NeuFit team. And I said, what is this? And they said, oh, you want to try it? Do you have any pain? I said, well, who doesn't have pain? Of course, let's try it. And so I tried the newbie for about 10 minutes tops. It was, my back had been bothering me. I'd been doing some stretching and whatnot, but, therapists were just like everybody else. We're the last people to treat ourselves sometimes. And I had the mapping process done on me. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, what's happening? And, put the electrodes on and I had very basic, range of motion exercises did for my back, stretching. And they're like, that's it. And I'm like, that's it? And they're like, yeah, see how you feel. And I was like, okay. I had the best night of sleep that I had had in months. The next day I went back to the booth to tell them. Sarah was there from NeuFit, and I was like, I haven't felt this good in a long time. And I was late to the introduction, to the speaker that was coming in. And I thought, oh, he'll talk for a half hour, no big deal. So I didn't have a seat. I was at the back of the room or whatever where he was speaking. And he ended up talking for like an hour and a half. And normally if I was standing there for an hour and a half, my back would ache a little bit and whatnot. And I had no pain. And the whole time I kept thinking, this is unbelievable. I couldn't focus on what he was speaking about. And he was speaking about a really cool topic. He was talking about the U.S. soccer team. And I couldn't focus because all I could focus on is, I have to get this machine. My back is, I can't even believe it. I have to go back. I have no back pain. And of course, I called my husband and I was like, I'm coming home with this new, and he's like, are you crazy? What? You just went to Arizona just for what is happening? And the plane ride, it was wonderful. Like I had so much energy. I felt great. And yeah, so I ended up, that's when I got the newbie and I did all the NeuFit training. And so then what happened is I was bringing the newbie with me to my mobile clients. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I had all these people reaching out to me because they heard couldn't stop talking about my new machine that I got. And so come January, I opened up a clinic, and I now have a brick and mortar in downtown Highland Park. It's wonderful. It's great. And as I say, it was because of NeuFit and you, Garrett, and whatnot. It like changed the entire trajectory of my career. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. How long were you using the newbie in your mobile? Was that about 3 months that you were using it? Then you decided to open up the brick and mortar facility?
Yeah, I think it was October, November. Yeah, about 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people, there's quite a few mobile people, therapists that that's all they do, they carry it around but I felt like I wanted to be able to treat as many people as I possibly could with it. And I felt limited by, only being able to go to one person's house at a time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to introduce it to therapists. It was like, this is a chance to bring in other therapists so they can learn about it and they could utilize it in their practices. So I felt like having a clinic was the means to being able to really educate the Chicagoland area, because nobody really has a NeuFit or a newbie here and really knows about NeuFit. And I was like, I want everybody to know about it.
Amen. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
And I also, I know we've connected on this too, but so I grew up in the Chicagoland area and I'll be up this summer. So now that you have the brick and mortar, the Kinesio Lab open, I want to come visit. I want to come check it out too in person.
Yeah. Always welcome.
We were actually, I got to see it on camera just now, and you were going to record out there, but we figured out there was a little bit of an echo because it is this beautiful open space, but unfortunately it was, so you're in the office. So if people are watching this, if you're listening, it doesn't matter, but if you're watching,
yeah,
she's now in the office because of the audio purposes there.
Yes. A little echo.
So yes, it is. I mean, congratulations on that. And I love that, entrepreneurial spirit of figuring out the mobile operation and then realizing you want to make a change, opening this. I respect that. And I think, many people listening to this may feel inspired as well by that. So I just want to acknowledge you. And then I also want to bring up a topic. When you and I spoke here in Austin, you said something that really gave me chills. It made me I was just so excited to hear it, because it put words to something that I kind of hoped to happen and kind of observe, but it was just a very objective way to sort of say it. And you said something to the effect of, you had been, an effective therapist. You had learned all these different techniques and were doing by the known standards of physical therapy an excellent job, but you felt inside that it was really only about 85% of what was possible. And everyone sort of seemed to be okay with that because they didn't necessarily know how to break through to higher levels. So, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but can you describe that, your experience and that sentiment and sort of elaborate on that for us?
Yeah. So after I met you guys in Arizona and I came home, like, I knew right away that there was something, I was trying to actually explain it to my husband. And this was before I was even, I literally read your entire book on the airplane home. And which is great. I recommend it to everybody. I tell my patients to read it. Like, I think everybody should read it. I think you do an amazing job at really just helping people understand how to integrate the nervous system into life and orthopedics and just everything, I think, where it's been missing, and not just like neuro-based conditions. But so I came home and I was trying to explain it to my husband in particular, who is not in healthcare or has any science background, of why do you need this, Cristy? Like and I've never been a modalities person. I've worked for almost 20 years, even being in large, outpatient orthopedic setting where I've had access to, ultrasound and traditional e-stim and all this other stuff. I've never been Ionto and all that. I never felt like it was enough of an improvement or a help in conjunction with traditional treatment. So I just never, and this was the first, and so he was confused because he's like, I know you don't like modalities. You're always saying like, I'd rather have the time with my patients or use my manual skills, like why? And so that's how I explained it to him. I said, I'm a perfectionist anyways, and I can own that. And my kids will tell you up and down, like, Mom, it's fine. No, just a little bit more. And so I would get my patients to a point where they'd see their doctors and their doctors would say after surgery, like, you look great. You're great. You're good. You had surgery, you had a major issue. Like you're where you're going to be, or, you're a little older. You're only going to get to, that's their favorite thing, right? Like you're getting older. You're not going to be 100%. You're older. Well, no, and so I always felt like when I was discharging a lot of my patients that I was like, oh, I feel like there's something missing. I could do more. And that's what I explained to my husband is like, the newbie to me, it was the missing link. It was the missing link that I've been looking for years to get my patients from that 85% that everybody was happy and satisfied with to like that 100%. Of so much so that I called previous patients that I had, relationships with that I knew wouldn't be offended if I was like, can you come back, get a prescription from your doctor, or can you come back? I want to do another like 4 weeks of therapy. And these are patients I had discharged a year ago, somebody who had a total shoulder replacement. And, her surgeon's like, you had a total shoulder replacement. And before that, you had a rotator cuff repair that failed. You had your surgery, it failed, you retore it, you needed a shoulder replacement. It's been 3 years. Like, this is good where you are. Be happy. And her specifically, I called her and I was like, can we do therapy again? And she's like, you saw me on and off for 3 years. Aren't you sick of me? And I was like, no, I got to try this out. And so after I got the newbie, I came back or she came back and I saw her for a few weeks. Mind you, I'd been seeing her on and off for years because of the failed rotator cuff repair and the surgery with the reverse total shoulder. And within a month, every time she came into the clinic, she had this huge smile on her face. And she's like, this changed my life, Cristy. And she's 80 and she's a phenomenal 80-year-old. Like you would never know. But like, so she jokes like, it's not like who knows how long I have, but she's like she went from like, I could lift my arm here to like, Cristy, I do a senior workout class and I'm not part of the shoulder crew who has to be careful when the teacher tells us to do an exercise. I'm not a shoulder person anymore. So it really, and that's what I was looking for, was that there was that 15% that I knew could be, and it wasn't a hardware, as Garrett, everybody who's listening, who listens, and Garrett talks about like the hardware versus the software. Like it wasn't a hardware issue. The doctor fixed the hardware. He did his job. He did a great job. But the software, there was so much trauma from her. She originally fell and then she tried conservative therapy. And then she had she had rotator cuff repair. And that's a trauma. And then she's immobilized and has pain with that. Then she has her rehab. Then she tears it again. Then she has a reverse total shoulder. Like there's lots of trauma. There's the nervous system, to everything you guys talk about with NeuFit. Like that was what the issue was. It was her software was so confused and the nervous system didn't know how to accept the new surgery that was meant to work properly.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned it, and I love hearing you describe it that way. And surgery is fascinating because, like you said, the nervous system is just registering trauma. It doesn't know that this is a benevolent trauma, that the
Right.
surgery is actually intended for our greater good, right? All it recognizes is, gosh, we've been cut into, sewn
Yeah.
back together. There's all, and so it responds like,
Hammered out, like,
yeah. It responds. Part of us has been cut off and replaced with a new metal foreign thing, right? All this. That if you just look at it objectively, it's like, dang. If you think an injury is threatening, try surgery, right? It's like the
right.
bigger, stronger, older brother, or it's like the more severe form. So the reactions are even more intense, and that's awesome that you were able to help her. And I love that. How you describe that, where you helped her get to that level, but then you asked her to come back and were able to just get to that next level. How did you describe to her the difference when you were, I mean, obviously you said, you asked her to come back, I got this machine, in terms of languaging it to your patients, because I think you're very good at connecting with people. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you described to her what you were trying to do, and how you helped her understand what was happening, and some of the language that you used with her, as speaking provider to patient?
Yeah. Well, and I think, like what I was just talking about was the idea that, and with a lot of my patients, I explain this idea that, and I use your example with hardware versus software. And I say, like, listen, we, and, the doctor fixes you to a certain extent, but there's more than just bone, that goes into the body. I actually had a patient, and then I'll get back to this, but I had a patient say to me, it was a teenager, and she goes, "You ever notice on like Halloween, they have the skeleton supposed to be scary? And so, you have the skeleton." She goes, "Could you imagine if you had just a bunch of nerves in your body walking towards you?" She's like, "That's way scarier than the skeleton." And like that, right? Like that was I was like, "You're right." Like, right? If you, instead of having the bone structure, you had the nervous system, and that was what you were like, that's scarier. But
That's
it
that's a
just
good,
goes,
that's a great observation.
isn't it? I was like, that's so true. But like, and I actually use that a lot. It's like I say, like, and it goes back to that. If you think about the nervous system, the brain, and all the nerves that we have, whether they're superficial nerves or they're muscular or motor nerves or whatnot. So a lot of times I just explain to the patient that there's this perception of threat, and I remind them that, like you talk about a lot, that pain is an output, it's not an input. And we have to go back to this basis of like, what is a pain signal and why are you getting a pain signal? And even though you have pain, that doesn't mean that we know you had a surgery, especially for like my post op patients, like that is, you had a surgery, and the doctor said everything's good. You go to the doctor, they do imaging, the surgery went well, everything's healed, your bone is healed, the tissue is healed, whatever the case is. And, the patients will say, "But why am I having pain?" You know, particularly with back problems, right? And you've had sciatica symptoms for a while down the leg or something. "I'm still having pain, and I had surgery, and the doctor said I'm fine. Why do I not?" And so that's how I explain it. I was like, the nervous system is our body's computer, or, the brain's the body's computer. And, maybe it hasn't gotten the message. And so by using, you know, the other great selling point is the mapping process of the newbie. And so that's where I really talk about, listen, when I go and I map you, and I could really see, even though you say you come in, you're like, "It's my hamstrings feel so tight." That's a big one. And I go, and they're always amazed that they feel nothing on their hamstrings. And that's what's so cool and it helps me explain it to them, is that you can go over certain areas and they feel nothing, and with mapping, and then you go over other areas and they're like, "What is going on? Did you just turn the machine up?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't do anything." That, and so then, that's a really powerful way to have this conversation of, see, this is where the nervous system, and I use the example of like throwing a baseball or a football at your face, right? If I throw a baseball or football at your face, you're going to flinch. Well, how do we then retrain not to be flinched anymore? And when it's a major injury or a major surgery, that's what's happening. So I use a lot of examples when I'm talking to my patients. And, it helps if you have a really good relationship with your patients and they trust you. And, I do find the first time, even with my patients that have come back for another injury, and I didn't have it the first time I saw them when they injured their knee and now they hurt their shoulder. And I'm like, oh, I got this, new machine and whatnot. Well, we didn't use this before. And, I explained to them that, the nervous system really impacts how your body moves and how your body perceives external threats.
Yeah, beautifully said. I appreciate that a lot. And, I'm glad to know that message is landing with the people of Highland Park, because it's, sharing that message is I feel like is a big part of my mission and what really gets me out of bed and excited in the morning here. So I'm glad to know that you're doing it. You're finding ways that land with the people you're working with. And it's an awesome story about that woman who no longer had to be in the shoulder group there. Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how NeuFit and the newbie can impact your life, please visit our website at www.neu.fit. That's neu.fit. So you can learn more about how it might integrate into your professional practice, how you can use it as a patient, and you can also connect with our team there. I know you've had some really amazing success stories, and I would like to ask about those. But first, since we talked about this progression that you've had, to now within the last several months, opening your own practice, you've just gone through this process of finding a space, building it out. Obviously, part of it, you still have some space where you might buy additional equipment, stuff like that. But can you talk to us about your approach and priorities in designing your space? Obviously, I'm grateful to hear that you talked about the newbie being a catalyst for that, and obviously is a big part of the Kinesio Lab there. Can you talk about what else was a priority for you? What other equipment-wise, technique-wise, in terms of how you're orienting the space? What were some of the other things that you really wanted to have there, or that you feel good about, or other things that, if someone else was thinking about starting up a new practice, you would say, well, you have to have this piece of equipment, or I'd recommend setting it up this way. What comes to mind for you in that regard?
Yeah. Well, I think that being that I was at such a large orthopedic place and there was access to everything there, right? I mean, and half of that equipment never got used, and half of that machinery, and and some of the stuff that did get used, it was even some of the cardio was kind of like, well, they're just there because I'm not ready for my next patient. I'll throw them on there, but like, was there really benefit for them sitting on the new, the NeuFit, or I mean I might try and blank on the name of it. Anyways, the machines, the new step. See, there's too many news here right now.
Yeah. No relation, by the way, between NeuFit and NeuStep.
Yeah. Anyways, and so, and then when I went into the home, you realize like there's so many things that I was able to accomplish with, there's only so much I could carry into people's homes. Although sometimes it got a little crazy because I was like, well, and I want this and this and this, and I'm carrying the bag, and they're like, you're going to need therapy pretty soon as I walk in with this big bag or whatnot. But, so, that was the big thing, is that when I went to open the clinic, I was like, I don't need to have like 100 million things that you see in lots of big clinics, because I wanted to make sure that what I had was really what I was going to use. And then, you kind of add here and there based on, different populations of people you're seeing, and like, oh, this would be helpful. And I wanted an open space. Something big about with the clinic is, I want the ability to still sort of treat one-on-one. I don't want it to be, so I want everything, open. There's not a lot of private treatment rooms. There's just like one area that's private if necessary, but I wanted it to be an open space. And I wanted something that was compact that kind of can fit everything. So I did sort of a system with the ability to throw the TRX on there and the ability to do weights. And it had a weight pulley machine, but then it has, an ability to hold on almost instead of having like some type of bar or something. So if we're doing balance, they have the access to being able to hold on to something, and then, having a bunch of balance equipment and, you know, nothing to, you don't need a ton of stuff to get people better. Um, you just need the right stuff, but you don't need a ton of stuff. And,
Yeah.
I think it's all just the goals of where you're heading and how you're looking at it. If you can get your patients in an area that they can move in all three planes of motion, and you can add some weight and you can challenge the external force coming in or the input in your feet, I mean, you're covering all your bases. So
Yeah.
that, and then you add the newbie to it, and, you don't need a ton of stuff because you have the ability to challenge in ways that, you don't even need a ton of weight sometimes. And I have patients come back and they're like, they leave and they're like, wow, you only gave me 3 pounds? Like, really? And they come back and they're like, I can't believe how sore I was. And, I remind them that it's this direct connection, the nervous system to the brain. We're doing neuromuscular re-education. And those are areas that you thought you were activating. It didn't matter how many times I said to you, pull those shoulder blades back, turn on those back muscles. There's just no way to get the brain to figure out how to do that. So, you don't need a ton of stuff to train people and get people back into, into their sport that they're playing, or, just walking.
Yeah, I love that. I love that approach, and it reminds me of the space that we were in, a few years ago, just before moving into this one that you visited, or that if anyone's been to our office in Austin since the summer of 2019, they would have seen that, the one that we're in now, halfway through 2024. But before that, we were in this office it was about 12 to 1300 square feet, and it was shaped like a long corridor, fairly long and narrow. And so when we first started out in that space, we had it arranged with equipment, and we had carts, and we were pushing newbies around, and sort of tripping over each other and stuff. And so we did some strategic planning actually, and thought, okay, what volume of visits do we want to be able to service in order to achieve our goals as a business? And we realized that we just couldn't do it there. So it forced us to do this great exercise of planning out how would we do it. We ended up getting these 7 identical stations, each one with just a rack that came out, 2 feet from the wall, had a pull-up bar there, little bits of weights and straps at different, there are different things there. But we had 7 of these stations, and then all the clients' patients could come in, do their whole session at that in a 80 square foot station, a 10 by 8 thing, because of, like you said, the newbie allows you to add so much. Sometimes you don't even need extra weight, or it's very little what you would need. And we were able to, we'd have, most of the day we'd have 5 to 7 stations filled with people coming in for a variety of rehabilitation or training or performance working towards those different types of goals. And it was really cool, and I really like that minimalist approach. So it just came to mind when I heard you say that.
No, it was super cool. And when I was in Austin, I took a weight training class, and that's how I loved how it was utilized, that you could, and then that was, as a business owner, it's like, well, how do I offer other services that complement and really keep people, after physical therapy? How do I keep them moving the way they should be, and, utilizing all different motions and incorporating their nervous system so they stay, at that point where they are when I discharge them. And that was a great, anybody who's in Austin, I highly recommend going and seeing, because it's a really nice way to see the setup, how you guys do it, because then you can bring in training and other aspects and group training. You can have multiple people they have their own session, their own little area on each of the training areas, and it's huge. It's a really nice way you guys have it set up.
Oh yeah, thank you. I don't know. I don't recall that we've actually talked about our group fitness classes. Maybe we have on the podcast, but I'm not sure if we have. But it is kind of a cool thing. Every Saturday morning, we have three back-to-back classes. That people come in for. We have a few at different times in mornings and on the lunch hour throughout the week, and it's very cool. Of course, we have multiple newbies set up. We have you one or two instructors guiding people through it, and it is like group fitness classes, but supercharged
Yeah.
with the newbie.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. That was great. And I know I do want to hear some more success stories. I know we were talking here in Austin, and it was like, oh, and there's also this person. Oh, and there's also that one. I think your kids were like, hey mom, we got to go. So we won't go through all of them. But what are just a couple of the other experiences you've had with patients that stand out top of mind as being kind of the more exciting, for you as a professional, the impact you've been able to make? What are some of the other use cases, other examples that stand out top of mind?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big ones, and not to say is just as a general ones, as patients who actually have been in another therapy place. And in Chicago, we have amazing healthcare. I mean, our I have nothing, we have amazing therapy clinics, and we have amazing but it's always a really wonderful and exciting thing to see when you have a patient that maybe was at another clinic, and they may, like I recently had a 14-year-old who tore his meniscus and was rehabbing somewhere else, and he really wanted to get back on the ice for hockey, and he just felt like, I don't know how and my son told him actually about the newbie and was like, you have to try this. Like, this is, and so I got a call, and they said, could you take him? He's been in therapy, but he really wants to get back on the ice. And he was a little apprehensive because he liked his therapist and he liked where he was going. The kid was, but the mom's like, let's try it. This is a great way. And he came into the clinic, and we did a scan, and we ended up then doing tons of our whole sessions with the newbie. And the wonderful thing is the doctor cleared him to get back on the ice May 1st, and then said, after that, it's up to your therapist. And they thought, oh, so by June 1st, do you think he'd be back on the ice? And I was like, he's going to be back sooner. May 1st, the doctor cleared him. Like, we have this was, a month earlier. And I said, we have 1 month where every session we'll do with the newbie. We're going to get him. And he was back, May 1st on the ice. He's been in clinics and stuff preparing him for tryouts for the end of May. And, it's just super cool because I know if it hadn't been that, I don't know that I could with confidence say he would have been back on the ice and playing with the aggressiveness that the kids are playing going into high school right now. And then the other exciting thing is that you and I talked about is like he has so much more of an awareness and understanding of like what it means to be like prepared for his sport. And I don't think he got that just from the traditional therapy. I really think that seeing the NeuFit and just feeling like he's, really pushing himself with it and whatnot, I think he's even more into keeping himself strong throughout the season, even when everything is healed and he's cleared, which I think is a pretty big impact to have on a kid specifically. But as I say, I count that a lot to using the newbie and them feeling like, I'm an athlete.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's very connected to how you so beautifully described, like we're sort of tapping into that missing link, that extra 15%. Uh, Both, like you talked about, being able to tap into the nervous system, yes, and I think there's also some gap or some meat left on the bone in terms of how traditional therapy, often isn't able to necessarily push athletes to that level. So just sort of reflecting back what you just said, where you're able to help him better prepare for the rigors of going out and playing very competitive ice hockey, really pushing himself to the limit. I think in traditional therapy, if your tools are, well, we can add more weight on the bar, but that's not necessarily safe, or we can do more reps, but they're very low load and it's more of an endurance challenge, and we're not really getting to that mix of speed and strength that we need, and that intensity and level of mental and emotional psychological activation. I think that is part of that, what you described as the missing link there too, is the ability to push, especially athletes, but general population too, but push people to the edge of their comfort zone, because adaptation only happens when we're outside of our comfort zone. It's only if something is uncomfortable or outside of our current level of capabilities would there be any reason for our brains to invest the energy and resources to cause adaptation, right? Our brains want to conserve energy. They don't want to use more energy if there's not a reason to do it. So that's certainly a theme we've talked about before on the podcast. But I love you, that point there, and so I think it deserves to be called out, of being able to at the same time have this safety net, where you can where you can push people, but do it in a way where you're not getting hurt, but then push them outside their current level of capabilities. You kind of have the best of all worlds there. So I don't know if there's anything more to say on that. I just wanted to
Well,
sort of
no, and
call
I
on
was going to
on
say,
that.
on top of that, if you think of where injury comes from, right? Is like, injuries, especially with the athletes, like, these kids, that's where it came from in the first place, is they got to that point where it was outside their safety net and the body didn't know how to react in that moment, or the muscle didn't, so it didn't trigger the muscle to turn on in that moment or whatever, and you load into the joint, or you tear your, ligament, or your whatever, your meniscus, because it didn't have that ability. And so then when you train, and this is a big thing that I tell, especially a lot of the kid athletes, but even my 50 and 60 year olds that are coming in and they're playing tennis and pickle and golfing and doing tons of like rotational sports like that. I say that, oh, my knees, they hurt, with tennis and whatnot. And I said, but that's because as it's really hot, it gets really hot and humid here, and tennis, for instance, is like, it takes, like, you're exhausted if you're not just playing 20 minutes, hour and a half, hour and 15 in, you're tired. And it's, well, how do you get the nervous system to push you to the end that you needed? And just by strengthening the muscle isn't going to be enough. You could do a manual muscle test and say, oh, you have 5 out of 5 strength, you should never get hurt. But I don't think that's enough. I think that, training then with the newbie and being able to have that adaptation so that the brain can respond when it's fatigued, and it can turn on the proper muscles, and the nervous system activates the way it should. That's where you're going to get less injury, and you're going to be able to sustain playing at an older, 50, 60, 70 years old, these sports that before people are always getting hurt. But I think you put the newbie on and all of a sudden they can do it. They're prepared. Their brain's prepared for it.
Yes, beautifully said. And I think that's a soundbite I want to take out of this for social media. That was beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is the the mix of timing and coordination and eccentric, movement of muscles to protect us in sporting events and things like that is a lot different. I sort of liken it to the alphabet, and metaphor that perhaps people have heard me describe before. But if if you're trying to learn to speak or write, you first need to learn the letters of the alphabet, then learn how they combine to make words, and then turn words into sentences and paragraphs, and build stories and things like that. And so, the letters in this metaphor would be, like you said, the manual muscle testing is important, but not sufficient.
Right.
And then same thing, having mobility, pain-free range of motion, adequate mobility at all of your joints that you need. So you can be in the positions, you can turn your muscles on. That's the word, the letters. And then when you can combine those, go from position to position through movement, you can make words. Then when you can turn those into skilled sporting actions, you're starting to build sentences and paragraphs.
Yeah.
And
like
I think you said that very beautifully, and that's just sort of another metaphor, sort of helps capture that same concept.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
great.
I could go on and on. I have another patient real quickly who had neuropathy in her feet. The doctor kind of was like, "Yeah, maybe it's this, maybe," and everybody kind of glazed over it. And she was having back issues, so nobody really, we tend to look at one thing versus. And this was right after I had come back and gotten the newbie. I was still seeing her as a mobile, and we did foot bath. And she kind of was like, I would say sometimes the foot bath is a little hard sell for those who aren't familiar and can utilize the newbie with a foot bath for neuropathy, tons of other things. But, one of the things is neuropathy. And I said, I knew her well enough that I said, just let's give it a try. Okay. And she's like, okay, I trust you, Cristy. Even though, and I kind of, it wasn't her main reason I was treating her, but I felt like it was impactful enough in the way she was walking and where I couldn't get certain balance things to be better. There were certain weight shifting, certain mechanics that I just couldn't get improved. And so we tried the foot bath. We did it a few sessions, and to this day, I mean, she stopped into the clinic just to say hi. And she was like, my toes, I can still move my toes. And I have feeling in my feet that I never would have had. But the most astonishing part of the whole thing was that all those things that were missing with where I was trying to improve her gait, and we were doing certain standing strength things, and there was a poor weight shifting, and it all went away because it was all contributed. And there was that lack of awareness that, like, I didn't realize the impact that, like, the neuropathy had. And hers was it wasn't as severe as other people's, but, like, it was a huge impact on everything else. And that, to me was remarkable, because we still laugh at, there was something she just could not do. And after we did a few sessions of the foot bath, I was like, let's just try it. And the two of us, we're like, what? How did you do that? And I think it's because she didn't have that proprioceptive input into her foot. She could not feel. And so her balance was off, her strength was off, everything was off, and it improved greatly. That was a pretty significant change that, more or less, there's not much else that you can do for neuropathy. So, I'm a huge, huge talker on the foot bath. I love the foot
awesome.
bath.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And at some point within the next handful of episodes, we hopefully will be having one to officially announce the publishing of our neuropathy study, which is in the peer review process right now. And many people at NeuFit Nation at least know about, but it's very exciting there. And we're seeing at scale, in dozens and dozens of people. It's a study with 150 patients, half getting the newbie, half getting traditional treatments, right? And actually comparing head to head, alternating current and direct current. But we're seeing in that study, many participants having experiences like that. So it's very exciting with objective measurement.
I'm very excited. I tell everybody about this study. I'm like, it's coming soon.
That's right. So that's one that I'm really excited to share. So we're doing a little foreshadowing. It's like another cliffhanger for a future episode. Come back next week.
Stay tuned.
That's right. Well, thank you for sharing that. As we wind down our conversation here, anything else that you feel like you want to share with your colleagues in physical therapy, or also extended colleagues in athletic training, chiropractic, who are also doing rehab, working with athletes or other populations? Anything
Yeah,
else
I
you feel like
think the
you can share?
one other biggest thing is, that it really changed my outlook in the last year of how I've been treating, compared to the previous years, being that I've been pretty much a outpatient orthopedist or orthopedic therapist, is don't forget about the nervous system. It has such impact, and um, I've started really diving into Garrett's book reviews are great. Pay attention to some of the book reviews that his book reports that he recommends and whatnot. But I started just really diving into all different books that I don't think are as heavily known amongst the therapy community, specifically physical therapy, of like how the nervous system impacts orthopedics and um, our posture and everything, and that it really has changed the way I've treated people. I've seen dramatic improvements just on the concept of paying more attention to like what inputs look like, how our um, bodies respond to trauma, and really it's respond to trauma, respond to stress, respond to pain. What does that mean to have chronic pain, and how does that alter the way in which our brain functions and how we view things? And I think then that becomes, as a treating therapist, when you have more compassion for somebody who's been in chronic pain and how there's changes even within the brain to people being maybe more depressed or people not having a positive outlook. And I think as a clinician, then you have to be, sympathetic to that and really, explain to them that you understand what they're going through, because sometimes I think, it's hard to constantly care for people, and it's not an easy profession. And we talk about it in healthcare in general, like burnout, but I think really remembering the nervous system really changes your outlook on how you're treating orthopedics, and your sensitivity to the orthopedic condition and being in chronic pain, especially. Um, that's it. And as I say, everybody who can, I would read Garrett's book. I would encourage you to read more books on the nervous system, on the vagus nerve, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. We didn't get into that, but there's a whole wonderful area with the newbie and the master reset and whatnot. And I think we're, in therapy, in physical therapy, I think we've always done a great job at treating the whole, really looking at the whole person. But I think we're still learning on really what that means. So I encourage everybody to, and if you haven't tried the newbie or you haven't looked it up or anything, you need to. I can't say enough wonderful things about it. And yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the kind words about my book also. And are there any other specific book recommendations, a top 1 to 3 that you would recommend, addition beyond the NeuFit method?
No, I can't remember the name of that.
Okay. But that's what
There's
I get
one
for
I was listening to. I think it's the pain relief. But the other thing that I'm looking, doing a lot, and because I think is also about like migraines and headaches,
mm,
and trying to figure out how to utilize the NeuFit method and newbie to really help, because I didn't understand how like how headaches and migraines affect so much of our population, and then that impacts so many other things. And I think it's a stress that leads to then orthopedic discomfort, or what we think is related to orthopedic discomfort and whatnot. So just as I say, just books that I've just keep reading and learning and finding research and stuff on, and remembering the basics. I think that's what it is too, is, you, once you start practicing a while, you forget the basics. And like the whole concept of pain being an output, that's really a basic. We learn that in school, but I think we just forget it because we get so inundated in people in pain and we want to fix them right away. You go to the doctor and the doctor's like, here's a medicine. But like, what is that really doing? Are we really fixing the problem? We're not. And so, yeah.
I think also a lot of times, you can tell me if you agree or disagree, but I think a lot of times people actually do understand the concept, conceptually they agree that the nervous system is important. They just may not necessarily have the tools or techniques to really take that understanding and implement it into an outcome or a result, or actually be able to sort of put that abstract idea into practice. So I think that's sort of another thing, is that bridge from
or
concept.
Or that they don't know that there's anything you could do about it.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's something too, is that's when I talk to my patients and how I describe, well, what is the newbie and what, and I sort of sometimes use your example that you said with the, you can walk to New York from LA, or you can take a plane, and, that's the kind of how using the newbie, it's a kind of this direct current into what you're trying to get at, whereas, you can train your proprioceptive input, but it doesn't always, it's not necessarily going to make that big impact.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. I love that. And one other thing, just to elaborate on, you talked about migraines and headaches, and I actually had a very good conversation where we spent a lot more time on that topic on episode 66. I couldn't remember the number offhand, so I just looked it up. Episode 66, talking on special niches or niches, however you say that.
And he was working what was the doctor? And he worked in the dentist's office, and he did,
Logan
right?
Cooper. Yeah. He's an awesome physical therapist. He's the Cristy Steinberg of the East Coast. Great guy over in the just north of DC in Maryland. He's works a lot with head and neck and jaw, and then he also works with rock climbers. He has these two different practices, each with different populations. But yeah, so I'm so glad that you're implementing that, working with people who are dealing with those, because that can be debilitating. So I just want to mention that in case people want a deeper dive into that particular topic, since you brought it up.
And one other thing that just made me think of it, I mean, I could say 50 million things, but the other thing the newbie has actually, and just the NeuFit method has really helped too, is that areas in where we as clinicians end up finding our specialty, or where we feel comfortable treating and we feel like, oh, we've gotten really good outcomes. So we sort of stay in that space because that's where we've gotten good outcomes and we feel like that's our expertise. NeuFit and newbie, and utilizing the newbie, have really allowed me as the clinician to feel way more comfortable in treating diagnoses that I didn't always consider my specialty. And I've had much more confidence in treating diagnosis than I wouldn't normally, because of having that knowledge and this extra tool, because I see success, and it really is a nice thing as a clinician, because it decreases your burnout as well, because you get to kind of change and go in between different things, where you're not just like, this is my specialty and this is the only thing that's where I feel I'm really confident and good at, because I get the good outcomes. So that's been a nice thing too.
Oh yeah, that's a great perspective. I'm so glad you mentioned that, and I'm glad you're experiencing that. That's excellent. So
yeah,
if any patients are listening to this, we certainly encourage you, if you're in the Chicagoland area, to go check out Cristy's practice in Highland Park. If any other clinicians are listening to this and they want to follow along and see what you're up to, what's the best place to follow along? Is it your social media? I see you post on Instagram from time to time.
Yeah, I'm going to start to try to increase my social media posting. So yeah, you can go into the KLabHP is the Instagram, or just the KinesioLab.com is the website, or if you're in the Chicagoland area, stop in. I love to show you guys, anybody who's interested and wants to see, any clinicians want to come and see what, the newbie's all about. I'd love for you to come and spend an hour going through. I'd map you and kind of show you all about it. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that offer. I'm very touched by that. I appreciate that. And it's been really an honor getting to know you over the last year, since I had the good fortune of meeting you, and our team had the good fortune of meeting you at that Ascend conference in Phoenix. And I'm just so grateful that we've gotten to work together and to see the work that you're doing there in the Chicagoland area and the people you're touching and the amazing outcomes. And it's very inspiring. So thank you for doing that work and coming on and sharing your story on the podcast.
No, thank you for having me, Garrett. I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you on the next episode of the Undercurrent podcast. Please like and subscribe so you can get the alerts when the next one comes out. And we'll see you next time.